All right, I believe we are recording. And what's interesting about tonight is that on one level, we are at the 21st session, and two and one make three, and three is understanding. I don't remember if I've gone through the numbers with y'all or not, but one fundamentally is unity, two is balance and harmony. And when you're unified within the male and female and the spiritual and the material, when all of those are unified within and you're in balance and harmony, you're in a place of understanding. And this session actually is the end of the patterns that we've talked about. Tonight, we're going to cover embellishing and being a comedian. And this will have covered, 25 to 30 patterns that we've gone over. At this point in moving forward on a personal level for all of you is the application of not only identifying the patterns, but getting them under control as well, learning to identify from a symbolic perspective where you are in a pattern. Remember, all patterns flow in cycles. So by reading your symbols and identifying which pattern is at work, where you are in the flow of that pattern, knowing the outcome of the pattern, that in pre-programmed expectation that is being sought to fulfill, because in fulfilling the expectation, you validate the concept that created the pattern. So by reading symbols and finding where you are in the flow of the pattern allows you the opportunity to change the outcome. So instead of your history continuing to roll along in a horizontal level, it gives you an opportunity to change it into more of a spiraling effect so that you keep elevating your awareness, your consciousness, your spiritual essence. So having said that, we will begin with embellishing, which I thought was what we were going to cover last week when we covered lying. So the difference here is that embellishing is built on a fact, built on truth, built on what already is, whereas lying is creating something out of the ethers, something that really has no substance. It's complete fabrication. This, however, has a foundation. So in the emotional self, I came up with a couple of questions. And the first was, in what ways do you exaggerate about yourself? Because that's what embellishing is taking a situation and making it more, in this case, it's making yourself more. And how do you do that? Do you talk about, your accomplishments? Do you make your accomplishments or your adventures, more, not only more personal, but where you were the victor, where your experience was better than anybody else's, even if you did it with other people. I used to have a cousin that used to always embellish the stories. And then because he was my cousin, he'd have, actually he was also a fabricator. I think I talked about him in the last session. And my cousin would sometimes make up outlandish stories and always turn to me and say, "Isn't that right, Michael?" Being my cousin, or, you don't want to go against your family in a situation like that. But the real question for self is, in what ways do you exaggerate your power, your abilities, your men? I just thought about being a genius, are you the smartest kid in the class? I'm the smartest guy I know, kind of a thing. And sometimes there's another aspect to that, and that is when you do embellish about yourself, either about how much you have or how smart you are or how empathetic you are, and how clear-sighted you are. I can really see into people, and so on and so forth. When you do these kinds of things, are you trying to impress somebody, your partner, someone you're interested in? And why are you doing that? Because what really has to be asked here, because of it being in the emotional self, and that is, why do you feel it's necessary to embellish your reality? Is it a matter of non acceptance? Is it a matter of feeling not unworthy, but not as good as the people, your partner or some other people that you're with, which would be, also show up manifesting in the social self. So the real question here is why? Why do you embellish? Why do you make yourself out to be more on an emotional level than you really are? And obviously, on some levels, there's a lack of self acceptance. That's what it has to come down to. And whenever we run into that kind of a lack of self acceptance, it has to go back to a doubt and or a fear. I really believe that fear is the foundational element that's there. Doubt is just one of the manifestations of it. And then the patterns, depending upon which they are, will feed on the fear and reinforce it. And that's what patterns do. Patterns reinforce the concept that you maintain about yourself, good, bad, and ugly. Your pattern of behavior does that to validate the concept as being true. And as I've said multiple times before, even though it works against you, even though it hurts you, pattern is a pattern. So in regards to the physical self, what do you do with your appearance that is an exaggeration? And in today's society, we can see that with breast implants, cheek implants, buttock implants. Some guys, and women will be bodybuilders, which is a way of, taking the basic body and building it into something that on some levels is really not that appealing looking. Nonetheless, in their minds, it is. It's taking a fact, a foundation, and building it into something else altogether. And the question comes up, why? With breast implants, obviously, it's women needing to feel either more feminine or to present um, a more motherly, a more seductive, a more womanly presentation. Same thing with cheek implants. Again, it's to build up the face, to make it look more appealing, more attractive. And plastic surgery would also come into this area because you're taking something that already exists and you are, in your mind, embellishing it, you're improving on it, you're making it to appear more than what it is. And there are some, if you look on YouTube, there are some plastic surgeries that people have done to themselves that have turned themselves not into something beautiful, but into something not so attractive. Now the question there comes up, how is it that they see themselves? Because when we look in a mirror, and this goes back to bulimia and anorexia, these people, we see what we want to see. So they may see themselves as being heavy. Therefore, they're going to do the bulimic thing or starve themselves and create, do the anorexic thing. And yet, what they look in the mirror, they may see themselves as being overweight. People who go through the plastic surgery and come out with exaggerated puffy lips or skin so tight or whatever the case may be, they may think they look beautiful, and yet somebody else may say, oh my God, what did you do to yourself? And the question comes up, and this is the greatest question ever because it applies to every aspect of self and every single pattern. Why? Why are you there? Why? Not only so much why do you embrace that, and obviously we embrace whatever it is we embrace because we may not understand the root of it, the truth of it, or the concept behind it in terms of embellishing and trying to make yourself, appear to be more than what you are or enhance what you've had. The question is why? What are you trying to demonstrate? What are you trying to prove? What are you trying to accomplish? And why are you driven in that direction? The other thing that comes up with the physical self, and the question I wrote down was, how does this fit into your concept of competition? Now, some people may feel that they are unattractive and they can't compete, so then they'll go for the plastic surgery or they'll go for the enhancements, getting some work done or some implants created in order to put themselves into a better position, a more creative or a more competitive stance. So these are the kinds of things that one needs to question about oneself when it comes to their physical reality. When it comes to the materialistic aspect of self, one of the things that people do, and this is where brands come in, the question I wrote is, do you present to the world more than you really have? And I say this because there are some people who will only wear branded products. I know one guy who only wears Tommy Bahama shirts, maybe shorts and pants, I don't know. We never got that far in the conversation. There are some people who will only wear polo so that you know that they're wearing polo. They will wear something that's monogrammed. And if it's something that's not monogrammed, then sometimes they'll drop, oh yeah, I have a Ferragamo shoes or a suit, or they'll make up, they'll let you know what they have. In fact, there was one of the manufacturers in our industry. We were at a meeting somewhere and pulled me aside to let me know how wealthy he was by saying, see this tie? I bought this in Paris. I paid $300 for this tie. You see these shoes? I paid $150 for each one. And so he was always letting you know how wonderful he was, how much money he had, and how much everything he was wearing cost. And he may have really had all of that, but if you do, then why brag about it? So there's a question there. And I think I told you all the story about when I lived in Coral Springs, how some of the houses at the upper echelon end of town had these, Cadillacs and Lincolns. And I think Mercedes back in the 70s was still, it was a high end. There was no such thing as Lexus as that back then, or Acuras or Infiniti or Audis, to my knowledge, to my memory. But there were Mercedes, Lincolns, Imperials, and Cadillacs. And sometimes these, they would be parked outside in front of these big houses. And yet realtor people that I knew would say, there's nothing in the house. There's picnic tables. There's like no real furniture in the house. They're sparsely furnished. Yet the presentation to the world is, I've got money. I've got more than what I appear to have. And why? Who are these people trying to impress? If you're caught up in this, you really need to ask yourself why. Why are you doing this? Who are you trying to impress? Is it really worth going into debt to do this? Because some people do. They have to buy the expensive cars. In fact, I was reading somewhere that new car payments, people are behind like 2, 3 months. Why? Why go into that debt? Why go into that high-end car if it's beyond your means and it's really not affordable? And then in doing so, in committing this extra money to this reality to present yourself to being more than what you are, how does this affect your relationships with people? Because if you're always coming off as somebody who's got more than everybody else, you're dressing better, this costs more, that costs more, check out my car, it's brand new, I got all of this in there, et cetera, et cetera. How does that make everybody else you hang with, the people you socialize with, the people you work with, how does that make them feel? Is your statement saying, I'm better than you? Does that imply that they're lesser? Are you putting them down? What's behind your presentation? Because that's when it comes to the material self, even part of the physical self, it is a matter of presenting yourself to others from a place that you really may not be. You're standing on solid ground. That's why it's not lying, but it's embellishing, because you are standing on solid ground. There is fact there. There is substance there. But making it more than what it is really what the question is, and that's what has to be concerned or considered. When it comes to the social self, is this a technique that you use in social settings? And are you using it because maybe you feel less than the people you're with? And if so, what is that about? Where does that feeling come from? My cousin that I talked about, who was always making up stories and sometimes embellishing on things that we did, adventures that we had, because we did have adventures. Barry and I, we were what, 4 weeks apart, 5 weeks apart. We were very tight. We would go exploring. We would go fishing. We did things together. But whenever Barry would tell the story, it was always more than what it was. And I think that part of the reason for that is that because Barry was short. Now, I'm not saying that all short people embellish, but some might, in order to compensate for, they may feel that their, not lack of stature, but that's what came to mind, but the fact that they are a little below average in height may stimulate the need to make oneself look larger in life than one really is. So in the social self, a lot of that will come out. I can remember another friend when we were growing up, also a very short guy, and one of the things that he did, he was always dressed to the nines. I mean, he was Mr. Fashion, always stood out, always had the nicest, neatest together look ever. And as one of his friends, because the question here I have in the social self is, how does this affect your friends? And I could always think that I wondered, where Mark got his money, where he bought his clothes. I went, wow, boy, that was a great jacket. What a fabulous looking shirt. And his clothes were always tailored. And I always admired that look, because later on I got into the clothing industry and I realized how important a put together look was, because, I guess it falls into that dress for success. These days, you'll find me in jeans unless I'm at a trade show, in which case I'll be in slacks and a sports shirt. But Mark, like I say, Mark was always dressed, and I know that it affected some of us who didn't have money, and we were doing the best that we could as teenagers. And even into our early 20s, after I came out of the service, we still, didn't have money, but yet, Mark was always there. At any rate, questions to ask yourself: why? Obviously, the best one. And also looking outward in a sense of, how does this affect my friends? How does this affect the people you work with, the people you live with, the people you socialize with? On a spiritual level, I wrote down two fundamental questions. Do you present a more pious persona to others? And the other is, do you exaggerate your good works, your deeds? And again, there are some people that need to demonstrate that they are holier than thou, that they are more religious, they are more spiritual, they are consistent in their talking about their good deeds, their good works. And in reality, if you go back to something that Jesus taught in the Gospel according to Thomas, everything you do from a spiritual point of view should be done in secret. You know, I think and I don't remember the teaching, but it's where the disciples said, you know, should we give alms? Or should we pray? Should we fast? And his answer to all of those were, not so others would know it. You know, do your things in secret because the Father will know. God will know what you're doing. When you do it in public for others to see it, then that's really more of a way of seeking approval and recognition from man, not necessarily from God. So there's a question there that needs to be asked, and that is, you know, why? Why are you presenting this particular persona to the world? Are you seeking man's acceptance? Are you seeking man's approval? Good questions to ask. So those are some of the ways in which embellishing affects your life. Maybe some of the symbology involved would be to examine the car you drive, where you live, how you live, the clothes you wear, the brands you particularly shop for. You know, where do you shop? Some people would not be caught dead in a Walmart or a Target or a J.C. Penney. Questions worthy of examination, so that the more, you know, I think you've heard me say this before, the more you know, the more you grow. The more you understand about yourself, the more you can identify your patterns and your attitudes about different things, the more you can get them under control. The more that you can get them under control, the less likely you are to be stimulated at an emotional level, because it is the emotions that get us into trouble. It is the emotions that allow the negative forces, the dark forces, to operate and manipulate an individual. And as you know, we can see from our society that when emotions get out of control, damage occurs. People end up hurt, some end up dead. So that's the pattern of embellishing. Next up is the pattern of being a comedian. And what I mean by that here is that there are certain people that are always on, so to speak. They have this need to entertain. Now, some of them do it as being the center of attention. Others do it to make other people feel better about themselves, or to feel better about the person doing the entertaining, the comedian. So the three questions I wrote down were, why do you feel that you must entertain others? And there is that must entertain. And I'm sure you know somebody like that, that whenever you all get together, even if it's just the two of you, that they will crack jokes. And sometimes, you know, that's what question number 2 and question statement number 3 I wrote down. Why do you make fun of yourself? And in what ways do you attack others as a joke? And I think in one of the other patterns we talked about, where I had a sales manager and an educator, a researcher, who were always attacking each other with jokes. And I said to them one day, you know, you guys think that you're joking and you're making fun of each other in a playful way, but the truth of the matter is these are subtle attacks, because when you say something that diminishes somebody else, that denigrates them, that raises a defense, when that defense is raised, that also will stimulate a pattern of behavior. Now, they can either do something in a retaliatory way, or they may become more withdrawn. They will still lash out. They may not lash out at the person who made the joke about them. It's the old, the guy gets hollered out at work. He gets home and rags on his wife. She in turn rags on the kid, and the kid in turn rags on the cat or the dog or whatever the pet may be, so that the emotion gets transferred downhill and to wherever we can vent. And that's the problem with emotions. They must vent. And here, when there's an attack, and it doesn't matter how the attack comes, whether or not you make fun of yourself, which really needs to be questioned, or if you're doing it outward. In both instances, there's the seeking of a reaction. Now, we can again rationalize, justify, well, hey, I'm just trying to entertain and make you feel good about yourself by putting myself down, or I'm attacking you because I really resent who you are or what you're about, or what the nature of our relationship is. So it's really essential that you understand this, because as the teaching goes, it's not what you eat that defiles you, it's what proceedeth from the heart. It's the things you say out of your emotions that are the most detrimental. And as you well know, because you may have had the situation where you've said something, someone attacked you as a joke, and you in turn retaliated with a joke that may have been unbelievably hurtful to the other person, and you may have regretted it the moment you said it, but it was out of your mouth. Once it's out of your mouth, there's no retraction. It's really that simple. Next up, we talk about the physical self. And here, it's like, in what ways or acts do you do to entertain others? What came to mind when I was thinking about this was Chevy Chase, when he would always do, on Saturday Night Live, he would always do falling down or do something to hurt himself. And there may be things that other people do to entertain. Maybe, I was just thinking about juggling or skateboarding or bicycle tricks, things that one does on a physical level as a form of being, entertaining and being funny about it, being a comedian about it. And sometimes they can backfire. You can get hurt doing something, trying to entertain. And the other thing I wrote down here is, what types of jokes and pranks do you perform? In fact, there was a show on TV, I think 3 or 4 guys, about they would pull pranks on people, thinking that it was funny to do it. And yet in some instances, it really offends people, attacks people, and can hurt people. And I know you've seen, America's Funniest Videos. If you watch that from time to time, every now and then they'll do something, they'll scare somebody, they get a big kick out of doing it, but the person ends up getting hurt. Sometimes even the person doing it ends up getting hurt. So this is another thing that really needs to be questioned. Actually, every single pattern that you have, that you've identified. And again, let me go back to something I think I said last week or the week before, because in all the patterns that we've talked about, Some of them you can easily identify, others maybe not so easy. Prioritize the ones that you think are the most detrimental to you. Because as you prioritize them and as you work on them and identify them and begin to alter the outcome, especially if you can understand, and this is the most important part, if you can understand the concept that is the foundation that created that pattern of behavior. Because remember, it's the pattern that helps validate the concept as being true. So you need to understand the concept. By identifying the patterns and identifying the concept, you can evolve out of the concept. You can master the pattern so it no longer affects you. So in looking back over your notes, looking back over these conversations, and one of the things that I would do now that we are at number 21, 3 is understanding, I would, and I recommend that you do this, go back to the beginning and start over for 2 reasons. Number 1, you will hear something again for the first time. And what that will do is stimulate, and now that you've gone through so many of these and understand so much more than when you first started, that by going back to number 1, by the, as you start going through that and re-answering the questions, redoing the worksheets, more will become apparent. It's like, I don't know if you ever remember the movie Help by the Beatles. I can remember going, and I probably saw it 4 or 5 times. And I'm a Beatles fan, what can I tell you? And every time that I went, I heard something new that I didn't hear before. And it was like epiphanies, like, oh, wow, I didn't get that the first time. And you may have had the similar situation in books that you've read if you go back and reread them. I always say to people with all of my books, go back, reread them, digest the material, same thing as we're doing here. Digest the material, which, you've been doing in weekly bites that we've gone through the last, bunch of weeks. You've chewed on it, you've digested it, you've assimilated some of it, you've understood some of it, you've grown because of it, you have a deeper understanding of life, a greater awareness of what's going on around you. Now go back and re-listen, and I guarantee you, you will gain even more out of it the second, third, and fourth time, because your hearing has expanded, your understanding has expanded, you will see more, you will understand more, you will control more. And that is the key, is controlling your emotional responses, your actions, and reactions. Okay, from the material self, it's all about the pranks that you perform, the jokes that you do on other people, and the 2 other questions that evolve out of that are, has your actions caused you to lose money, and have you cost others money because of your doings? Because sometimes we'll act in a way, trying to, entertain people, whatever. It's like, I don't know. I guess the first thing that just flashed in my mind is when you see people pull the tablecloth out from everything, and everything, nothing moves. However, you may try it, and guess what? Everything crashes to the ground. It's going to cost you a bunch of dough to replace it. You may have done something, tried to be cute or funny in a restaurant situation. It may have caused, damage there where you had to pay for it. Or in doing something like that, you may have hurt, or caused or broken something that belonged to somebody else. And of course, you have to compensate them for their loss. So these are things that could occur in trying to be funny and trying to be entertaining. In the social self, I really asked it, and I think we covered this somewhere else about being the life of the party. And I'm not sure I remember, maybe it was in the approval pattern, or I honestly, I don't remember. We've covered so much, but I know that I've talked about this before. And the question still remains, why? Are you the life of the party? Why do you have to be that person? Can you be a listener? Can you be a bystander? You can be a participant. Being a participant is one aspect of attendance in a social situation. Commandeering it, making yourself the funny one, the entertainer, the life of the party, that's a whole other animal altogether. And if you are afflicted with that kind of a pattern of behavior, why? What does it benefit you? What does it get you? Do you think it gets you acceptance and approval by everybody else? Or is it possible you are stimulating resentment and rejection? This is why it's also essential to know where you're coming from, what your modus operandi is. You may say, well, actually, we've gone this far, and I think I operate with a little bit of both. And you know what? That may be true. However, there was, before you came to this place of understanding, there was one fundamental modus operandi, and it either was approval for acceptance or rejection for acceptance. Now, don't misunderstand me. People who seek or operate out of approval for acceptance can also have all of these other patterns, have some of them at work within them, like the pattern of sacrifice or perfection, or being a victim, or denial. They still, it's part of the approval process. So you really need to identify where you're coming from and the patterns that are relative or relevant to that particular modus operandi. The rejection doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means you seek rejection. The comedian could be one of those personalities. Depletion, deprivation, dissatisfaction, disappointment. All of those could be part of that personality. And you still could be a nice person underneath it all, but underneath is that need for rejection. So that's why it's essential to really identify who you are, what your modus operandi is, and all of the patterns that are associated with that persona. Remember, who you think you are is not who you are. Let me rephrase that. You are being who you think you should be. However, through the process of enlightenment, you realize that that is not who you are. And I think I've told you this before in Revelation, and I don't remember where it is. You can look it up. If you have a Bible dictionary, an electronic one, or a Bible gateway on the internet, just put in white stone in the book of Revelation, and you'll see it talks about your new name is written on a white stone, and no one will know it but you. And I think I've given you the symbology about that before, where a stone is something you could use as a weapon to defend yourself. It's something you could use to be a wall. So that too is a way of defending yourself, although that way, or you also imprison yourself. White is symbolic of purity, of knowledge. So having a new name means on some level giving up your ego, being open. And because a stone can also be a foundation, and so you have a new name written on a true foundation, one of being defenseless. Because remember what Jesus taught when the disciples asked him, how can we get into heaven? He said, you have to be as children. Children are non-defensive. That's the way we all have to be. We have to lower our defenses to allow our spiritual self to manifest. But that doesn't make you vulnerable. Not when you are in control, not when you have eyes that see, ears that hear, and then you're in a place of understanding, because you can understand the attacks, you can see them coming, you can hear them. Doesn't mean you have to respond to them. Okay? So if you're the life of the party, why? Last but not least is the spiritual self. This was really rather a difficult one for me to, come up with statements to talk to you about. And the only thing I came up with is, can you find humor in things? Because a comedy is not necessarily bad. When it becomes something you feel compelled to do for gaining attention, yes, that's when it's a pattern that works against you. But if you can see the beauty and find laughter in things, find the humor. Now, obviously, not in the bad things, because one needs to be clear about what one is looking at and how one is responding, because everything that you see is stimulating an emotion. So you don't want to find sadness in everything, and in the same regard, you don't want to find happiness in everything, because both ends of those spectrums, the being overly happy and overly sad, both will create tears, and tears cloud or distort your perception. So if you're so joyful that you well up, well, you're not seeing the situation clearly, because obviously you've been touched emotionally, and that's where you're responding from. If, on the other hand, you get so angry you can cry, again, your emotions have been stirred now in the negative way, and again, you're not seeing the situation clearly. Here, I ask only that to see if you can find the humor in those things that are humorous, because some people feel that a good time, fun, joy is not in keeping with their religious belief. That maybe, you're not allowed to have joy because then you get out of control. And there's some truth to getting out of control, but you should be able to find joy in everything you do. So this actually concludes, like I said, 25, 30 patterns of behavior that we have gone over. I highly recommend you go back to your notes. I highly recommend you start over. And that way you can also fill in on your notes. And again, I've recommended over time that you spend at least, maybe 15 minutes a day if you could, 2-3 days a week, so that you stay on top of and involved with the information. It's not something that, oh, I went to class on Sunday night and I heard this, that, and the other. No, this is applying the teachings to everyday life, to living, because it will make things better. I guarantee that. And you may have already seen that and have had an effect on that. Next week, we will begin universal teachings for daily living. And what we will start with will be the 10 commandments, because they're really a great foundation of thinking, and I will give you a completely different perspective on application of the teachings, of all the teachings we're going to cover, to show you how they are so relevant to today's living and to your daily life, and how by employing them in your daily living, you will evolve into a happier and healthier individual. So, on that note, I will say thank you for this evening. Thank you for tuning in and listening. And I will look forward to working with you next week, and we will start in on the Ten Commandments. So, thank you for everything. Thank you for being.